everyone. This is update for June 21, 2023, day 483, of the war, end of the date update. Also catch up for June 20th. So I'm gonna, as always, start with strategic topics, and then we're gonna switch to the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine. So I'm gonna start with China because it's making headlines. So as you can see, U.S. president called Chinese president dictator, literally or probably 24 hours after the meeting with head of U.S. Minister of Foreign Affairs. As I said, this is not some renaissance in a relationship. This was just some forced trip where we probably were on over some shooting war, and that was the only reason for that trip. And we're back sort of to basic. Also, in light of all of this Chinese installations in Cuba, I would say it makes more sense with the balloons, because when you have those, call it listening or radio electronic warfare stations in Cuba, you can scan a lot, but you don't have details, and you obviously cannot go deep inside, track everything in the US. So those balloons were sort of kind of like covering area that's you cannot cover from Cuba very well, and sort of basically have full visibility for the entire country. So that sort of makes now a lot of sense from that perspective. At the same time, China is actively doing sort of war diplomacy. So the Chinese Minister of Defense met with South African counterparty, or I think maybe it's a chief commander, but essentially it doesn't matter. Basically, the top who is in charge of the armed forces of South Africa, which is, I guess, no surprise, because South Africa is aligned with Russia, Iran, and China alliance. And then also another high-ranking member of Chinese military top. I think it's the deputy of Central Military Committee, if I translated right. But the whole point is not exact the name. Basically, the very at the high level Chinese military met with Pakistani head of Joint Committee of the commanders of the Pakistani army. So as you can see, and again, Pakistan is very closely aligned with China. So this is also very kind of dangerous sign, because now diplomacy moves not just from diplomacy to the military diplomacy, and this is again, with that trip from the US to China that happened, it all sort of gives very concerning, alarming, I would say, signs, because you rally your, I would say, military allied countries before you go into military conflict, and that's sort of the problem with all of this. Very interesting at the same time that Pakistan is selling 155 millimeter shells to Ukraine, which is I guess you can say ironic. And then let's switch a little bit to more energy policy or energy situation. As I said many times before, all of these sanctions on Russian crude oil failed, and I would say miserably. So the import of Russian crude oil by China reached record in May, and it's 2.3 million barrels per day. It's reported that it's significantly was reduced in June so far, months to date. The reason actually for that is because China has a quota system for refineries, And basically, Russia was so eager to get money as soon as possible that they fulfilled the quota for the quarter already essentially in May. So the whole thing will resume in July. It just Chinese authorities don't want sort of one country, one supplier dominates, so they have this quota system. So if you used up your quota, then you have to wait till next quarter, and that's what's happening there. And also, Russia is exporting now close to 2 million barrels per day of crude to India, to be exactly 1.96. So as you can see, between the two, they exporting basically they selling 4.3 million barrels. In Russia right now, some are probably getting under 10 million barrels of production. They obviously consume internally quite a bit, and then they also export to countries like Turkey, everywhere else. So they have no problem so far of selling its crude. It still works despite all of these attempts to block Russia. And I think the numbers that were quoted for the export to India were like, I think it was like $83 per barrel. I don't know, might be wrong. Looks very high and way above $60. That was that ceiling. It might include shipping as well, but don't know for sure. In any case, they're not selling for sort of rock bottom prices. And as I said many times before, in Russia, the cost to extract oil is very low, and especially if you do it on a cash basis, it's probably like $10-15 per barrel. It could be even less. So as you can imagine, it's hugely profitable, and it's obviously fueling Russian war efforts without problems. And as I said before, the only actual solution is actually to encourage production of crude oil, natural gas, all sort of conventional energy in the world, so the prices go down. The same would happen in the 80s, and unfortunately, the policies are completely going in completely opposite direction, and that's why we seeing this failing sanctions on Russia. Also, very interesting what happens to them. Factories that were built by Western companies in Russia. So Russian government is actually selling those to Chinese. So, for example, Bosch refrigerator plant was sold to Hisense, and basically what they do, they essentially confiscate those factories, and then they sell it to Chinese who operate them and basically produce whatever appliances, cars. By the way, the same story is happening there. So essentially, Russia is very grateful to the West for reindustrializing Russia for free. Basically, the same would happen. Well, I guess it wasn't for free in the 30s with the Soviet Union, but it's very similar. By the way, there's not much of a difference, except at that time, Soviet Union actually paid for that industrialization. Then one more topic is going to economy. Is first of all looking at the UK, and then they had this CPI numbers coming out, and they were not looking good. The core CPI in UK was year on year 7.1%. However, the PPI is showing signs of slowdown. So basically, what's going to happen? In this high CPI that was printed in the UK was last hurrah of high numbers for inflation in the West, meaning we probably will not see 8, 9, 10, 11, 12% anymore. That's all doesn't mean that the problem is resolved. We probably will see very persistent 4 or 5% inflation in the West. And that's going to be a big problem because part of the thing that I didn't get to actually show is the difference between the growth in wages and inflation. and you can see that inflation is outpacing the growth of the wages, and then cumulatively it accumulates over time, and your standard of living is going down, and unfortunately some people will getting in, basically being pushed into the territory where they basically up against the wall and have no choices, and that's creating social unrest in the West in general, and I would say probably UK is going to be sort of very active in that area, probably Germany as well, France, and so on. So all of this is result of all of this, and as I said before, all of this is result of the policies, economic policies that's being implemented in the West that create this to a large extent. It's just the Russian invasion just sort of, how to say, accelerated, right? Exaggerated this process, but it's not the main sort of driver for this process. The main driver is internal erroneous, in my opinion, internal policies in the West, and that's what really drives it. And unfortunately, they're not being reversed. Sort of the current sort of ruling class everywhere stays the course, so that really means that this will continue, and eventually it may lead to really serious social unrest. Right now, we're seeing sort of, I would say, sort of warning bells. But if this continues, there will be, very serious social unrest eventually. Now let's actually switch to Ukraine. I just want to talk a little bit generally first where everything stands. So, as I said before, Ukrainian offensive failed. Ukrainian command still have resources to continue, but so far choosing not to continue. And obviously, the reason they choosing not to continue because of very unpromising initial results, which are not surprise sort of to the viewers of this channel, because I said many times before, if you have a Soviet army where you have negative selection in general and disempowerment, that's a result. And so if you don't change that, the only way that Ukrainian army can sort of move forward is much more Western military equipment. So basically, if you don't have quality in terms of skills and organization, then you need to compensate with excessive number of weapons. And that could be either quality in terms of weapons or quantity of weapons. And I would say probably quality obviously is always better. Well, not always. I would say in most cases, probably always is not the correct word here. Ukrainian command is realizing this. They might be incompetent, but then they see the results, and they understand if they continue with the resources they left, and it's about, let's say, 80% relative to what they had before the offensive. Could be plus minus, but roughly, let's say, right? So, they can just burn through all of that, all of those resources, or a significant portion of those resources. And basically, once you get to 50%, then essentially you're done. So there's not that much left to kind of burn through. And it's basically effectively the Ukrainian command has, like one more shot or 1.5 shots, or maybe 2 shots at most. And so they realize that those shots probably not going to be successful. And then if you burn through all of that, then you're opening yourself up for potentially successful Russian counteroffensive. Russian army right now is sort of lacking the boots on the ground. In some ways similar to the summer of 2022. but they will get back Wagner Group sometime, as I said. I think it was August 5th, and it's not that far away. By the way, it looks far away, but it's not. And they can basically try to attack weakened Ukrainian army at place of their choice and be successful, and quite successful. And so this is a dilemma that Ukrainian military command is facing. Obviously, they share that with the political top, and so I think they are sort of they out of ideas how to move forward, basically, because they cannot get that many the required number of weapons from the West, and they not willing to change organizationally, skill wise, basically philosophically change the army, and that also means changing society. Because in that case they have to kind of leave because they're not competitive basically themselves, uh, and that's kind of like difficult situation in general, and how it's gonna get resolved, it's unpredictable. Let's put it this way. In many ways, Russia is facing the same problem, except in the Russian case. They actually do have functioning organization with significant capabilities, and it's Wagner Group that can't potentially, let's say, if Russian military or government fails, there is sort of backup, sort of alternative organization that can take over. In Ukraine, there is nothing like that, so it just fails. It fails, and so we'll see how it all plays out in the coming months of the summer. And I also want to mention that it looks like Ukraine might be getting this F-16. As I said before, they are not gonna change the situation because, first of all, Russia has MiG-31, which I explained are better than F-16. I don't know if they have the missiles, air-to-air missiles. If they probably not better, but because the airplane is better, so you can sort of compensate it and have like sort of equal situation. And the problem is that Russia has like 200 plus of MiG-31. Ukraine may get, I don't know, 40, 60 F-16. Basically, it's not going to change anything. It's just going to be another front, except it's going to be air front, and it's just going to be, live its own life without really affecting the situation on the ground, basically. And that's basic. What that really means is that West will need to even throw more resources, and quite a bit of resources, because airplane burns. It's super expensive. It burns a lot of fuel. Thing like MiG-31 like burns like, I believe, like 21 tons of basically jet fuel or kerosene for like, if I remember, like 700 kilometers flight. So you can imagine, and plus tear and wear, it's the numbers gonna get very quickly astronomical for supporting Ukraine, and that's probably part of the reason why there is such a hesitancy to supply F-16. Is just it probably will cost the same what's being sort of spent on the whole thing right now, or close to that. It's going to be very substantial number, and very quickly. And as I said, it's not going to make sort of really real difference, real change. It's just going to open, second front line, or whatever, third, like air front line. Okay, now let's switch to the actual walk through the front line. I'm going to start in a clockwise fashion, as I always do, starting with the border, state border between the two countries. Situation quite a bit sort of quieter now. No Ukrainian incursions. The shelling is at the minimum, at the lowest level, so things are somewhat quieter at this point. Now let's move to the North Lugansk front line. things here, as I said before, there's nothing really meaningful happening here. This continuing fight in this large forest here, whatever we seen a couple days ago was just the pressure. As I said, it's not real offensive. It's just the pressure to keep Ukrainian units glued here, and so they're not being transferred as reserve or reinforcements to the actual offensive section of the front line, basically to the Zaporizhya front line. Now let's move to the North Donbass front line. Things here are the same, essentially just tactical fighting, some like tactical attacks by Russian troops, similar things or from Ukrainian side, but they are essentially, it's basically standstill on both sides. Not really much happening here. Now let's move to the central Donbass front line. Things here are very much similar. This now Russian command renewed its attacks out of this Pyatyhatky salient. Again, it's almost sort of hitting your head against the wall kind of approach, and the same is happening in Marinka. So basically, this is World War One at its finest, essentially pretty much everywhere. Now let's actually move to Zaporizhya front line. Things are relatively quiet. Just again, only tactical skirmishes, but really nothing of their sort of large scale or even like something that's worth mentioning. The only thing is, and this is just on a kind of refresher on this situation near Velika Novosilka, things did not change. Essentially, Russian side is still controlling the Staromayorsk as a stronghold and Pryutne, two key strongholds on the way to the actually real first front line or defensive line, which is numbered here 2 because number 1 is just screening. It's not meant to really be like the main one, and then the third one is truly main one. So as you can see, Ukrainian side did not even get to the main defensive line, and this is last updated on the June 13th, where there was some success on Ukraine side. And then this village Pyatyhatky there's a fierce sort of local fighting. Russian side is counterattacking, trying to retake, or basically trying not to allow Ukrainian troops to move out of this little salient or appendix. And so far they are successful in containing Ukrainian troops here. But again, nothing major. This is, I would call, tactical fighting, essentially. It's all, as they say, quiet on the Western Front. Not truly quiet, but it's definitely nothing major is happening at this time. As I said, it's really toss of a coin how and where it's going to go and what Ukrainian command is going to do. There's obviously tremendous pressure externally and internally to do something, and that's where there's going to be this sort of crunch situation, or like do some sink or swim basically for Ukrainian military and political top, and we'll see what's happening there. But I would say I would not want to be in their position, because if, let's say, they become more intelligent overnight and start actually doing right things, the first results will be probably in 6 months. So even if you at this point start doing everything right, it will take 6 months to see real results on the front line, and they're not even doing that. So so the situation is obviously not great for Ukrainian side. It doesn't mean that the Russian side is in perfect situation. They are not by any means, but as I said before, they have 4 times more population, so they can afford this living in this sort of pain and having sort of a lot of blood spilled. Ukraine is not in the same boat. Okay, thanks for watching, and till next time. Thanks, bye-bye.